Well, good morning. My name is Mads. I'm part of the team here, part of the 18 to 25s ministry. And today we get to say goodbye to some of our students, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later in the service. But I wonder how easy you find it to follow directions. I remember a time when I definitely didn't follow directions. It was actually about 16 years ago. I think I was in year 6, and we were told to cut out stars out of pieces of fabric. And Mrs. Brown was her name. She gave us some clear instructions. I listened to those instructions, or so I thought, and I began cutting stars out of fabric until she came over to me and she said, "Class, stop. Mads, can you come up to the front for me? Tell me exactly what I have just told everyone to do." And I couldn't tell her because I actually hadn't listened. She had told everyone to conserve the fabric really, really well by cutting stars and starting at the edge of the fabric so that actually you could get as many stars out of that fabric as possible. I had cut one giant star out of the middle of the fabric, and she was absolutely fuming with me. I don't think she's lived it down since, but there you go. The passage that we're reading this morning is about listening to God and responding to his call, not just doing things our way, not letting distractions of the world pull us into a different directions, but instead being attentive to God's call. Paul, who we read about in the story today, was attentive to God's call. He turned from persecuting Christians to then having an encounter with God and to then responding to God's call by traveling the world and telling others about the healing power of Jesus. He knew God, he was living for God, but he still had to learn each step of his journey to rely on God. He listened to God for direction rather than thinking he knew best. And I think that's the way that we're called to live for Jesus. But sometimes I think that we can be a little bit more like this mouse. Has anyone ever seen one of these before? Do they look familiar? We used to have one at a preschool I worked at. It was called a bee-bot, looked like a bee. It's for helping children to learn directions and coding and thinking ahead and planning ahead. The preschool I worked at, we just used to chuck it down the slide. We didn't use it for what it was for, but I've got another one here. This is a little mouse that I've got with me today. The idea is you put in directions. Let's turn it on. You've got normal mode or hyper mode, so we'll try hyper and see what happens. You put directions in advance, then you send it off. It's pre-programmed, and you create the path that the mouse is going to take. So everything is controlled, and with this one, you can actually put up to 40 steps into this mouse. So maybe let's take some options from the audience as whether you want him to go forward, backward, left, or right. We'll put in loads of different ones, so just shout them out. What would you like first? Forwards, that's a good start. Anything else? Just more forward. It's going to go straight off the stage. A left or right, anyone? I'm hearing a right at the back. Any more? We want a left. Yep. Anything else? Jim wants back. Okay, anything else? We've got 40 to go here. Keep going. I'm just going to start pressing. Any more? Consonant, vowel. Yep. Oh, no, I've pressed go. Look. There you go. Off it goes. Okay, great. That's how it works. You can put 40 steps into it. You just keep clicking around like this, and you can plan its directions. You can plan its route. And I wonder if actually we can be like this mouse sometimes. We have our plans. We have our ideas of where we want to go. But instead, sometimes I think God's saying, just slow down, listen, look, I've got something for you here. Just wait, you're missing it because you're too busy with your 40 steps ahead. He's still going. He's still going. And I think sometimes it's getting scary now. You're too close to the edge. Sometimes God's like, no. Just slow down. Just wait. There's something I want to teach you in this moment. But why should we be obedient to God's call? I've got here a piece, I was going to say cheddar cheese, but it's actually a cheese string. Love them, always have, always will. And this is something the mouse loves, right? It's something the mouse wants. It's something I want to eat as well, actually. But what looks enticing actually can be very dangerous. There's a cheese string there in a mouse trap. The Bible talks about the enemy coming to steal and to kill and destroy, but Jesus has come that we might have life and life in all of its fullness. We aren't just called to be obedient to God because he's a commanding dictator, but because he knows what's best for us. Often listening to God keeps us safe. because it allows us to be redirected to where he wants us rather than where we think we decide that we want to be. And this was true of the story that we read today in the Bible. In the passage that we read about Paul, they tried to go to Asia, but God didn't allow them. We don't fully know why this was, and it's possible that the people there weren't ready for the gospel. They weren't ready to hear about Jesus. But it's also possible that it's because it was a hostile place where they were hostile to who God was. And so God had other plans. Paul listened, he responded, he stopped, and he redirected. God knows what's best for us, and listening to him helps us to be where he wants us to be rather than where we decide that we want to be. And there may be things in our lives that we know aren't helpful for us. Maybe for you, that's habits. Maybe there are some people who you're influenced by that you know aren't helpful for you. Maybe there are things that look enticing, but actually pull you away from God and his directions, things that get you trapped. And I guess we have a choice as to whether we listen and respond to God's call in obedience or whether we continue our plan, our 40 steps ahead without listening to God. The good thing is that obedience can also lead us into places of blessing. In Paul's story, responding to God's call meant being redirected somewhere where they could be a blessing. Because they slowed down, because they listened to God, God was able to send them somewhere where they could be a blessing. They avoided danger, but also they were sent to a lady called Lydia. And they shared the gospel with Lydia. And Lydia came to know Jesus and believe in Jesus. Not only that, her whole household came to know Jesus, all because Paul and those with him were obedient to following where it was that God was calling them. There's joy in listening and responding to God's call. God doesn't just redirect us away from danger and temptation. He also redirects us towards places of blessing, places where we can be a blessing to others. We're saying goodbye to some of our 18 to 25s today, and it's fascinating to watch them come to university, and all of a sudden, there are so many of these. So many mousetraps around, so many things that can trap them and pull them away from God. And suddenly, there's so much freedom, and before you know it, they can't see, they can't see the traps from the cheese. They can't tell the difference. And before you know it, they're getting stuck and they're getting trapped. It's almost like some students start university and they input their 40 steps. Oh, he's off already, hang on. They input their 40 steps. They're like, I'm going to start university and I'll start it my way. I'll put in these 40 steps and I'll see where I end up and I'll see what I decide to do. And then maybe after those 40 steps, after Freshers Week or after the first term, maybe then I'll stop and I'll slow down and I'll listen. Thank you. That's God's saving power. There we go, that was close. They put in their 40 steps and they think, actually, I'll do things my way. Then when the 40 steps are up, then I'll see what God has to say. Then I'll look at finding a church. Then I'll see about taking my faith seriously. And maybe you feel that too. Maybe you're also like that. You think, I'll do these 40 steps. I'll make these 40 decisions in my life. Or I will live this way for a bit, and then I'll check in with God. And if it doesn't work out, then maybe I'll try God's plan. Or then I'll check in with God, and I'll check He's okay with the decisions I've made in hindsight. I'll check He's okay after I've made those decisions, rather than taking one step at a time and listening and being obedient to God. But what I love with the students is that after 3 years, you can look back. They can look back and they can say, look, I recognize the places where I wasn't obedient to God's call, to Him who knows better than I do. And as a result, yeah, I've made a few mistakes along the way, and there are things that I regret. But they get to look up now and they get to see that actually over the 3 years they've learned not to input 40 steps, but maybe to do 30 steps, and then 10 steps, and then eventually 5 steps, and then 1 step. so that actually you're not waiting 40 steps before you listen to God, before you respond to his call, before you listen for his direction towards blessing or away from danger. But instead, over those 3 years, they learn to trust and rely more and more on listening to God, to be who he wants us to be rather than who we decide that we're going to be. And it takes time to cut down to 30 steps, to 15 steps, to 2 steps. And one day, maybe all of us will be able to say that we've been able to do it 1 step at a time, fully listening and relying on God. We're going to just show you a quick video about where some of our students in 18 to 25s are off to next. But what I'd love you to pay attention to is some of the mousetraps that they talk about that tried to pull them away. Some of the things they're very honest about, of the mistakes they made where they inputted so many different plans of their own that actually they ended up in their own kind of traps that pulled them away. But also have a listen to the blessings, the places where they stepped into what God was saying. They were faithful to his call and they listened to him and they responded to him in their life. So turn your eyes to the screen just as we find out a little bit more about what they're up to next.
So God's really provided for me in the friendship department. I think coming to university, I was absolutely terrified to come to university. Cried a lot, I got really anxious, was really worried about it. And immediately he provided within the first week in Freshers Week with my church. So coming here since Swithun's, been here for 4 years. And the Christian Union as well at university, got stuck in with both, which is really, really nice.
Actually, before university, I was quite new to Christianity. I really feel like burned out a bit or lost a bit during my uni journey, but God has given quite a lot of friends, a lot of people who treat me as family.
I think coming to uni, I got to sort of be an independent person and to make that decision of I want to go to church, I want to engage in the church.
I'd never really explored it for myself until coming to uni when I joined the Christian Union and joined Swithun's. And that's when I first started to get involved on various teams, on committee at CU. I've just seen that God's definitely worked in my life and helped me to grow in my faith.
When I first came to university, I did have a relationship with Jesus already, but the relationship was kind of on a rocky foundation. I was slowly losing my faith. I kind of started to drink, which I never had before. I started going out multiple times a week just as an escape, just to escape what was going on in my head, basically. And then by the end of my first year, I just woke up one day and realised, and well, I look back and I can see it was God saying to me, I have a plan and you need to be a part of it, don't miss out what I have for you. And so that whole week where I was doing exams, I actually felt so much calmness and Jesus' peace, and I would just stay up late listening to worship music, reading my Bible for the first time in months, and just falling in love with Jesus again.
I gave my life to Jesus at the weekend away, and now I get what it means when people say, I've been saved, because I know what that feels like now. And that was only 2-3 months ago, and my life is completely different since I did that. And it's just the most amazing feeling ever. As soon as I got home, my friends were like, well, how was your weekend? How was it? And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm a Christian. And they went, there's no way. And they were so excited and they were really supportive of me.
God has done crazy things since I started uni. I started uni not knowing anything about him and not knowing who God was. And then in second year, Jesus revealed himself to me through a vision, which is really cool. And then through that, I came to church, I learned what he can do, learned who he is and his loving character, and so many amazing things like that. And honestly, just transformed my life completely.
And after I had that whole epiphany, oh my gosh, I've actually done this, the first thing I saw was my Bible. So I picked up my Bible. First page I opened was Malachi. And the first thing it says is, I have loved you, says the Lord. Not, I do love you now, not, I'm going to love you now that you've committed to me. I have loved you through all the times that I doubted him and that I pushed him away. He has loved me during that. And then I moved on to the next page, and it was the New Testament. And I started from there, from Matthew, and I've been reading it ever since.
The biggest thing is how much the CU's grown, how many people are so keen to evangelise and spread the love of Jesus.
I think it's just more of the change that I've seen whilst being here, the particular one being the Christian Union. And then watch it grow over the past 4 years has been amazing. The numbers that we're seeing this year are like nothing they've been. So seeing new people either come to faith or having more Christians come to university it's been really inspiring.
I was really praying for my twin sister to also get to know Jesus. She was kind of into crystals and stuff, and then I think a year after I gave my life to Jesus, she also gave her life to Jesus, which is really cool.
In one of my supervisor meetings, I actually got the opportunity to share the gospel with some students and my supervisor. A 1 hour meeting turned into 2, and they were just asking me questions about Jesus.
I was talking to a friend and I mentioned going to church. I invited them along to a carol service, and then after Christmas they came back and they got more involved in the church, and they actually ended up becoming confirmed in the church. I don't really know, sort of anything where I'm able to work with animals, possibly researching animals. I've always wanted to research polar bears, and I want to continue doing that.
I always want to be a researcher, that I want to contribute science in society, for example, being in science education, ecological, environmental education and stuff.
At the moment, my aim is to head back to London coming September, which is somewhere I worked on there on placement last year, so I'll be heading back there, hopefully to the same place of employment as well.
I feel God's calling me to, potentially stay in Lincoln, stay at St Swithin's, and grow in my skills in leading worship.
I actually don't know yet, but I know that I really want to work in the field of psychology.
I'm really hoping to create like a little Bible study group for graduates at my age who, are curious about faith or who are Christians and just want someone to get a coffee with.
I'm heading back to London and hopefully doing something in student work, student ministry to help get other students to know Jesus and get them in church. Just because of my own experience as a student, I know how it feels to come to university and feel really lost, and then by the end of it finding faith in Jesus, and I just want other people to experience that too.
What I love about those stories is seeing the difference and the change, and even them admitting I started university and I wasn't sure about my faith, and it was on a rocky foundation. And then you hear at the end about the ways that God has used them. Conversations with lecturers about faith, conversations at the Christian Union about faith, invitations to people who have now come to know Jesus because they were bold in their faith, because they were obedient to God step by step. And you might be thinking, if God really wants us to follow him, why doesn't he just pre-program us as humanity with thousands and thousands of steps so that actually we're always obedient to him, so that we never make a mistake, so that God automatically tells us what we need to do? That would keep God happy, right? But the beautiful thing about faith is that we aren't code to God. We aren't code to Jesus. We're not robots to him. He's given us free will. He's given us a choice to choose to love him. God sent his only son, Jesus, to die so that every mistake we've ever made and will make will be forgiven, is forgiven, and so that we can choose out of relationship with God to be obedient to his call. And I guess the challenge for us today is, what would it look like for you to listen and respond to God's call? I think we often think about it in terms of maybe a job or a vocation or what you're going to do with your life. But what if, like Paul, we chose to listen and be obedient to God in every step? Not in every 40 steps, not in every 10 steps, but in every single step we make. Maybe like Paul, obedience to God would lead us to places that surprise us, places where we have the opportunity to have conversations with others about Jesus like we heard about in that video. And what is faithfully responding to God's call with courage and boldness is what led to lives and communities being transformed in your school, in your workplace, in your family. Taking it one step at a time, listening to God and trusting his guidance and his direction to go where he wants us rather than where we decide that we want to be. Amen.